Freedom fighters, I'm coming back at you with another Manic Monday rant. And what is there to rant about this weekend? I guess I kind of wanted to backtrack and talk about the Trump Putin summit there in Alaska that happened on Friday that I didn't have time to get to in the Friday wrap up. But yeah, it seems that nothing came of that, and it was all just more theater. And depending what camp you're in, there was different spin on the whole thing. I mean, at the end of the day, nothing came of it. Trump himself said there is no deal until there is a deal. And I was joking about it. I posted, Friday night, it's the art of the no deal. And I think Trump thought he was going to go in there, the bull in the china shop, or, the fighter he likes to present himself as, and bully Putin into basically giving up the war and all this stuff. And this whole, I was talking to people about it, some of my friends and stuff, and this whole, aspect that he's coming at it because he just wants to be a peacekeeper, right? He's looking for a Nobel Peace Prize, and he always says, I'm just trying to stop the killing. Yet he has no problem donating more weapons to Ukraine. What do you think that's aiding to, right? More killing. He has no problem backing Israel and helping Bibi out and sending more, weapons, aid money, whatever. What do you think that leads to? Right? It's more war, more bloodshed, more killing, more fighting, whatever you want to say. So, the whole that's part of the act of like, oh, I just want peace and I'm here to stop the killing and stop the war. And he said one of the things, one of the main points they were disagreeing on. I think Putin's one of his main things that he was like, we could come to a ceasefire is the West, and NATO needs to admit who started the war. And this was a big part where everyone was fighting over, no matter what propaganda news station you were listening to, whether it was Fox News or CNN, they were all pushing, Russia is the aggressor in this war. Um, and they were the invaders, and Putin's one of his red lines, and one of his concessions that he wants is that to admit that Ukraine started the war, or essentially NATO and the West started the war. um and again, I saw this point being pushed over and over. And it's much more complicated than that, right? Just same as the Israel Palestine event, everyone acts like it happened on October 7th, right? That out of nowhere, Palestinians just crossed into the Israel border and started attacking, and started the same thing. And it's never a clear story as that, is it? Right? War is complicated, and it always goes back and forth. There's been tits and tats going back and forth for thousands of years in the Middle East, in the Israel-Palestine conflict. But as far as Russia, Ukraine, I mean, again, there's a history there. And in that first interview that Putin gave to Tucker, when he was going through the historical context, and again, I'm not a expert on these two geopolitical geographical locations, but as I seen it, um, Ukrainian and a lot of the European nations was part of Russia, and historically there were Russian lands. And then over time they've had like civil wars, and they've broken apart and stuff like that, and formed new nations, which is pretty much the story of history. Every country is almost based out of a separation from somewhere else, or people declaring that they're a different nation all together. But then they've been having a warring civil war, basically, Russian and Ukrainians, that share that border region, because some of those people see themselves as Russians. And they've been going back and forth at it, and then the Ukrainians have been attacking them. And there's been tons of news clips. I was showing some friends who were like, completely ignorant on the situation, that had no clue, who believed the narrative of, like, what the propaganda news is pushing. Like, out of nowhere one day, crazy Putin man showed up on the border and put tanks on the border and then crossed in and took over his neighbor's land. And I'm like, there's news clips as far back as like 2012 or something, and there was tons of different clips. And then um, the really good one I showed him, there's a Joe Rogan episode where he shows a clip of Stephen Colbert, and he's got some I don't know, CIA analyst or some intelligence officer on there, and I can't remember the guy's name or his position really, but you need to find this clip. I might be able to try to link it. Um, but anyway, he was like, yeah, we're distracting Putin, because this was during the Olympics. I believe it was 2014, and that was the conflict where they were fighting over um, Georgia, I believe it was, or maybe that was Crimea. I can't even remember. As always, do your own research, look this stuff up. But the guy's on Colbert, and he's like, yeah, we're distracting, Putin and Russia with, like, oh man, your medal count is so high. You guys are doing so well. Meanwhile, they're, funneling weaponry and, giving aid to their enemies and fomenting a revolution within the country. Meanwhile, gaslighting in them and, all this stuff. And Colbert's like, why don't we just spike the football and be like, yeah, we took over, or we're winning, or whatever. And he's like, no, we don't want to do that. We want them, to believe. So this conflict has been going in way before the, the so-called invasion and the back and forth of that whole, that whole thing. And, I mean, there's always two sides to a story, right? There's always if you've ever fought with a friend or something like that, and it's like, oh man, you're like, man, what happened to you, Steve? We're just, we're always fighting now. And he's like, oh yeah, well, it happened when you broke my PlayStation or something like that. And it's like, oh yeah, like, first of all, dumbass, I didn't break your PlayStation. When I went to go turn it on, it was already broken, right? It never came on. I didn't do it. It just happened you found out or whatever, when I turned it on. And then anyway, even if I did, $500 ain't nothing compared to when you were driving my car and ran into a pole and I had to, fix my headlight or my bumper or whatever. It was, $1,200-$1,500 worth of repairs, so let's just call it even there. And then he's like, well, that time that you did this and that. And what I'm getting to is it goes through a long line of, grievances and stuff. It was never just one single point. And, this goes through the, I did a video about history and how it's literally in the name. It's his story. And the story is almost always propaganda, and it goes as the way the winner tells it, right? Whoever's telling the story, which is, propaganda or whatever is in the history books, and who's writing the history books, is the way the story's going to go. And they're trying to write the story now that one day out of nowhere, crazy ass Putin just lined up the tanks and invaded. And it's just like all the other stories. I mean, we've dug into the Civil War here on this channel, and the what you learned in school and the propaganda of, Southerners bad, and all it was just a bunch of racist bigots who wanted to keep slavery, and then they never touch on, Northern aggression. They never talk about the the conflicts between a tyrannical government, an overreaching tyrannical government that they just freed themselves from, almost 100 years before that. Which goes back to what Thomas Jefferson said, that there needs to be like a revolution every 20 years, because they know that the tyrants are going to get back in control. And even when you settle the dust, right, or the dust settles and you regain your freedom. I wanted to do a video on this for a while about the revolution, and that quote in general, the Thomas Jefferson, um, the blood of tyrants and patriots. From time to time, the blood of tyrants and patriots need to be, or is the soil's natural manure, and the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed. And his idea of like every 20 or so years, like a revolution will take hold. Because even when the dust settles and you free yourself from the tyrants, it only creates a vacuum for a new tyrant to evolve or to take hold, right? So, I mean, that's that's why I'm kind of getting into why, that's another video, like I said, but why you need the Second Amendment, and you have to stay forever vigilant, because the tyrants are always lurking in the dark. They're always in the shadows, and they're always, willing to take hold. But I guess I'm getting a little off track there. But the whole point of this was the false propaganda of how they um, picture frame these wars. Basically, how they tell you, the stuff happens. Same with Uncle Mustache, the mustache man in Europe and Germany, from Austria. We all know who I'm talking about, but same thing. Out of nowhere, one day, Mustache Man appeared and just decided to kick people out of his country and go to war and disrupt the world, because he was just a crazy madman that had no logic or reasoning whatsoever. Just as simple as that. Just a madman. And if you go back, I don't know what this was, a couple weeks ago, might be a month ago. I'm losing track of time, man. It's just crazy the way time be flying now, and I've got my own perspective and ideas on that, man. It feels like time now. It's all a blur, and it's crazy. Me and my friend were talking about. It seemed like ever since COVID and Operation Warp Speed, were like, that might actually have been like a code word for some other kind of like time program or something, because it feels like everything's just been super fast paced and just craziness. But if you look into this tweet, um, Trump did it. Who knows when? A couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, could be a year ago by now. Who knows? But he basically came out and said, "I don't know what happened to Putin. He went crazy." And again, they were trying to paint that narrative of he's just a madman and he's lost his marbles. He's off his rocker, and all this stuff. So to wrap this up, man, nothing really has come of it. We're in the same position. What I believe. I'm the doomer. I'm the black pilled, believer that it's, I believe they're bringing us into World War III, and it's all theater. And, people are like, oh man, what a flex. Trump put him in his place, flying the bombers over his head and stuff. And supposedly there's supposed to be a second meeting in Moscow, but at the end of that, Trump was like, well, I don't know about that. I'll have to ask my people. And I don't believe it's going to happen, right? I think they found out all they need to know now, that Putin's like, no, I'm guessing he laid it down to Trump in that meeting. He said, no, you guys started the war. You guys wanted this. You knew the red lines all along. You don't park right up to my doorstep. This is their version of the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Why we didn't want Russia in our hemisphere, and we didn't want them right on our borders. And now we're doing it to them. And that was always their red line. And we've been funding Ukraine and giving them weapons for a long time. Again, it didn't happen, whatever it was now, 3.5, 4 years ago, when the beginning of the war started. It was, well documented prior to that. And, I just hope if they do have this meeting, Putin does the same thing and kind of trolls him and, flies a bomber over his head and, rolls out the red carpet with the Satan 2 missiles behind him and, says, oh, yeah, well, this is what we got too. Um, this whole idea of like they scared him and, put him into check and put him in his place, man. That's all part of the theater and all part of the spin and propaganda, man. But till the next one, man, you know what it is, man. We are on our own. Nobody's coming to save us, so get right with God, because only God can save you. Freedom fighters out.